All right, folks, welcome back to Getting In a College Coach Conversation. We just had a really wonderful conversation with Ryan Celta, who has been in sports journalism for quite a long time, went to Stonehill College and studied communications. But now, instead of talking about those who comment on athletics, we want to talk a little bit about those who might play college athletics. And what joining us today for that conversation is Kenan Dick, one of our educators here at College Coach. Hey, Kenan, how you doing?
I'm doing well today. Thank you.
Glad to have you. You are one of our resident experts on athletic recruitment, something that I think all of us dabble in a little bit here and there. I have a student I'm working with this year who is a potential baseball recruit. But I think it's one of those areas where families have a lot of potential hope and enthusiasm. Their kid is pretty good at sports, and
Right.
they want to know, can I get an athletic scholarship for my student at some point? It's a more complicated question, I think, than it sounds.
Absolutely.
And I want to talk a little bit about students in two different age groups. I want to talk about students who are heading from sophomore to junior year this summer, and then those students who are heading from junior to senior year this summer. So let's start with the younger group. Those who are between 10th and 11th grade. What are the things that are most actively under consideration for them right now if they have interest in being a recruited athlete for college?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, compared to when you and I went through college and up until probably 5 or 10 years ago, the timeline for the NCAA recruitment has changed significantly. So it's really moved up into that summer when coaches become more active with contacting students, getting official visits set up, and some of the more kind of heavy duty elements of the recruitment process. So for many students who are going into their junior year, especially if they're in that D1, D2 category, oftentimes throughout the summer, they've been going to camps, ID camps, tournaments, showcases, etc., where they've been able to demonstrate that athleticism. And that's often where many of these coaches are going to take notice, see if they are going to be a good fit for their program, and start those conversations. So for many students who are going into their junior year, the communication process has begun. And for some students with a high level of talent, it started even years ago. So for juniors, I would say one of the keys that they are doing is kind of developing that scope of athletic program that they wish to be recruited by, contacting those coaches directly, getting onto their radar. There's a step that they will most likely need to take in that communication process, which is filling out the student athlete questionnaire. So most students are going to go to that sport page that for the school in question. There's usually a link to that questionnaire right on that sport page, men's soccer, whatever it might be. And then they fill that out for that particular coach. Many athletic directors want to see that step taken before they go kind of officially into that recruiting process. So that is often, if you reach out by email or connect with a coach, oftentimes that's going to be one of the first steps that they ask you to do is fill out that questionnaire.
Gotcha.
They're kind of a pain in the neck. They probably take about 15 to 20 minutes with, all the nitty gritty details of your past performance and stats, etc., all included. So they do take a little while to fill out, but that's one of the key steps. And then many of those students are also using those opportunities throughout the summer to develop highlight reels, to develop video, especially for field sports or talent-based sports as opposed to timed sports.
Yeah.
So that so they have something to run with and be able to showcase that talent through to coaches over the course of this next year.
At what point do students in general have a sense that this might be a real possibility for them? It feels like with time-based sports, we've got one obvious answer, right? Which is if your times are approaching where you're seeing those college competition times, you're in really good shape, especially if you see kind of a trend where your times are decreasing, your performance is increasing relative to others. But some of these performance-based contexts, leagues are different, positions are different, intangibles are present. How does a student think about, am I good enough to be able to be in this pool of potential recruited athletes?
That's an excellent question. Um, Oftentimes, the answer to that question is going to be some of the better coaches that students work with. Sometimes that's a varsity coach. Oftentimes, that's a more competitive travel team coach that has had some experience with this. The hard part is that even in that realm, it's hard to find students who are getting really direct feedback from those coaches. So they tend to be a little bit more optimistic about students' chances of recruitment than is often the case. So take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. There are certainly students that garner that attention very early on, right? So it's clear that these are superstar athletes that get attention in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. And so for them, it's usually pretty clear that this is going to be happening. For most other students, it's something that they're going to grow into over those first couple of years, and attention will start to build as they go into their high school experience.
I had a friend played high school baseball with, and he was a great hitter, great player, all the tools. Definitely the best player I ever played with, best player on my teams throughout the years, pretty good player. But then we played against this other team with this kid, and he was going to be pitching. And about 20 scouts showed up with radar guns. And what I realized in that moment is there's really good, and then there is really, really good. And those levels, I think you start to see, especially when you're talking about differentiation between high school and college athletes, and what that recruitment process kind of looks like.
Exactly.
You did mention contacting coaches, and I think we often hear these stories of, illegal recruiting practices, and they're like the stuff of movies, and did you do this or that? And so sometimes people are concerned, can I contact a coach? Can I reach out? What do I do? How does that coach contact me? It sounds like you're saying that sending an email, reaching out to a coach is perfectly fine and something that is actually helpful for students who might be wanted to be recruited as athletes. Is that right? Any
That's
concerns
correct.
there?
Reaching out to coaches, I would not be concerned. The question is, what can they do in response? And that's where the NCAA has regulations, right? Okay. So what I would suggest is, and the problem is that each sport can be a little bit different, and what that timing is. So the NCAA puts out the guide for college-bound student athletes, and every year in the spring they put out a new version of that, and it has all of the different timelines for each of the sports that have different regulations outlined in it. So, for instance, when it comes to when can I schedule an official visit with a coach, each what it is for even men's basketball is different for women's basketball. Women's basketball is kind of the funniest one, where you can schedule a visit the Thursday after the final game of the Final Four competition. So basically, give your coach a couple of days and then get it rolling. So that's a very specific time, right? Most of the other sports are either August 1, but going into your junior year, or September 1 of your junior year.
Okay. Mostly junior year. And
mostly junior year.
This is something that you often repeat internally when we have meetings around our team around recruitment, and just reminding us a little bit about the timelines for students. But it happens pretty early.
It does.
And things get accelerated a bit if you're going to be in that recruited athlete space. And I think that raises the question for these students that are from junior into senior year. They are going to be applying to college just like everybody else this fall. But to what extent do they still have work in front of them as potential recruited athletes? Is most of it finished by now, or are there still some steps that they need to take? And is that dependent on their skill level too?
It's going to be dependent on their skill level. Division 1 and 2 versus Division 3 are going to be a little bit different in what they need to prepare. But I think you bring up a good point, or I think you alluded to a good point, which is in terms of the work ahead of them, that can be quite different in terms of the recruiting process, but also the application process.
Okay.
And so what I tell athletes is that you need to be prepared to execute on that application much earlier than most other students.
Mm.
So many students are looking at, UNC October 15th, or, early action, early decision November 1 types of deadlines.
Right.
Many of the athletes are going to get requests from coaches as early as August to send in their completed application.
Huh.
So for those students where they're kind of at the head of the curve in terms of that recruiting process, they need to be ready early to be able to take advantage of that. So I had a student who played lacrosse, was getting recruited by Wesleyan. He needed to have everything in by September 1. And I had a crewing recruit for Harvard. Everything had to be in by August 15th, I think it was.
Wow.
So that was just a mad scramble. So she had to try to reach out to her guidance counselor to get the transcripts in. They had to get a kind of jury rig the process to get the teacher recommendations completed. So it was pretty difficult to get all that stuff in. But many of the coaches want to do that, even though it's an early decision or early action application, which technically isn't due for a couple of months. Many times they need that application in early, and you'll get your decision. You'll get that likely letter, right? But they need to be ready to go much earlier than most.
Ready to go is a really interesting way of putting it, because you have a lot of students under traditional timelines, traditional applicants who are still visiting colleges, who are still putting their lists together, who are still deciding what schools they like. You seem to be suggesting that for athletes, this is something that you've got to make this decision, because coaches are looking for those apps. The admission office is in contact with those coaches, and it's going to happen a lot sooner. Do you have any recommendations for athletes who feel like they can't make up their mind, or they still want that more traditional examination of the process? Do they have to be ready to say yes sooner?
It depends upon where they are on that recruiting chart.
Yeah.
They should, if they are a hot recruit for that coach, be prepared for some of that pressure to apply earlier. And there are certainly coaches that will say, hey, look, if you can't decide, I need to move on, right? Because I need to know what my 1 through 5 is. And if you can't commit to that, then I need to find an athlete that's good for my program who can. And so sometimes they will get that type of pressure, which is unfair to the student who's undecided.
Yeah.
But they probably will have other opportunities where there isn't that type of pressure as well. At least hopefully they will. But if you look at that from the coach's perspective, if they need to have this wrapped up in a month, they don't have time to kind of let kids kind of just get to that point on their own.
To what extent does having stronger academic credentials put a student in a position of greater opportunity in this space? Is there a big difference between, say, being an all A student who's a recruit at a particular school versus being a student that has all Bs and is still a recruit at that school, but obviously the academic profiles are really different?
It's going to certainly open doors for students. And for some programs where they have a tier system, an academic tier system, if you're one of their stronger students, that's going to help that coach balance their list better. And so that might help you get into that particular program because you're going to be academically offsetting another weaker applicant or recruit. And then, of course, just in terms of the selectivity of the schools that you'd be applying to, that's going to open up and increase doors, right? So I was talking with a student who is an MIT recruit or on that coach's list. And part of what they're saying at MIT is you have to pretty much be able to get on your own, or you have to be pretty much at that level. And then hopefully we can get you on, if you're admitted, then we can get you onto the team. But they don't have the same type of influence that another coach might, where they have a slotting system, right? Where they can kind of designate who they want to bring in to a certain number.
Gotcha. So a great reminder, practice your free throws, but also do your homework, right? You've got to make sure that you're doing both things simultaneously, because it will create more opportunities for you.
Exactly. And if
Awesome.
a coach is in a position where they don't have to use a slot for you, that makes you an even more valuable recruit.
All right. So hit the books, and then hit the track. I don't know. There's a lot of different idioms that we can throw out here. It's sports after all. It's really easy. Kenan, thanks a lot for coming on the show and walking us through this process. It always is complicated for me, and I love how simple you make it for all of us. So thank you.
Terrific. You're welcome.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to talk a little bit about financial award letters. What are they? Can you share them with people? How to make sense of them? So don't go away.